Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan, and welcome back. I'm glad to have everybody here, and we have some special guests for today. We're going to end the year with a Marrison Marathon, so we have invited Emily Marrison and Dave Marrison to be with us. Thanks for coming, guys.
Excited to be here.
Great to be here, too.
Yeah, Dave's a returning guest. Emily's actually new to the show, so we want to welcome Emily to First Time Extension Calling.
Thanks, guys.
We're going to start with Emily today. Emily, tell us a little bit about your role with Extension.
So I'm a county educator located in Coshocton County, and my program area is family and consumer sciences. So with Ohio State University Extension, we say that's healthy people, healthy finances, and healthy relationships. So anything that we can be doing in our communities to help folks in those areas.
Fantastic.
Excellent. And Emily, you used to be in Ag and Natural Resources, correct?
I did. I started out for 6 years. I was actually the Ag and Natural Resources educator here in the same county. And then I switched over to Family and Consumer Sciences just a little over 4 years ago.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap between the two areas, too. We talk a lot about finances on the farm and staying healthy. So I think it probably was a challenging transition, but not so out there that you had learn a whole new subject area.
Yeah, it surprised some people because some folks, I think, do see kind of a line between that. But you're exactly right, Karen. There's a lot of things that kind of cross over. My background is food science. So I always felt like I was kind of an in-between because food science really looks at taking the food from the field and getting it to the consumer. So it's kind of all those steps that are in between. So I've always had to know a little bit on the producer side, but also be familiar with things on the consumer side as well. So it's really great to be able to bridge those two together.
Yeah, indeed. And being on our farm food safety team, I have learned a lot of things about how to, keep food safe beyond the harvest too. So I can definitely see the overlap from my side of things as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times we have done good agricultural production practices. And yeah, that food safety aspect is huge. And if it doesn't start at the very beginning, it doesn't get any better. So we're glad to have you talk about this with us. So I guess going into the holidays, Emily, we'll just go ahead and get right in there.
Well, hold on. I don't want to skip over Dave here. We're going to focus with him on our next podcast. We're doing a 2-podcast season today. So I don't want to overlook Dave. Dave, we're going to focus more on you on the next one, but just give us a brief introduction just to say hi.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, whatever time period you're listening to this. Well, I was a county extension educator here in the state of Ohio for 25 years in agriculture and natural resources. But just on November 1st, I transitioned into a new role, and I am now a field specialist in farm management for OSU Extension. I'm primarily working in the areas of farm succession and tax management and financial management for the entire state. There were 3 of us county extension educators that moved into those roles here in November.
Oh, that's exciting. And a little bit of a teaser for next week's show. So make sure you tune in again next week. But yeah, today we really want to talk about the holidays. We share a lot of food with family over the holidays. And so Emily is going to join us to help us keep our families healthy and keep ourselves healthy too.
So Emily, we're going to go ahead and just jump right into the food safety aspects. This is when families get together. This is maybe the first or the second biggest meal of the year, depending on how big your Thanksgiving was. But nonetheless, it's a very important meal. A lot of people want to do a lot of things all at once. And, we're talking about making sure that nobody gets any illnesses from improper food handling. And so what are some thoughts and recommendations when we're going into the Christmas season with cooking for a big family?
Sure. So I think one of the ways to approach it is to look at what are the things that are, I guess, like most critical, the things that could go wrong most often that could lead to foodborne illness. So as we think about our kitchens, one of the biggest things is just to have things clean in our kitchen. So many American homes, it's just normal that the kitchen is kind of like the collection point for a lot of life. And so we put things on the counter. We put things that have nothing to do with food or the kitchen on the counter all the time. Just making sure that we have clean surfaces, that we're starting out with everything as clean as possible is a good place to start. And then as we look at our different ingredients that we're using, are we needing to have those refrigerated? It really starts from the time that we're getting those at the store. This time of year, thankfully, we don't have to think about it quite as much if it's something that needs to be refrigerated because temperatures outside are pretty cool. But it's a good idea just to keep things separated, making sure if you're getting fresh produce that you're keeping that separate from any meat or poultry that you're getting at the store. That's a good place to start as well. And then after the meal, we can talk a little bit about that too. Not leaving things out forever. Yes, it is a cold time of year, but our homes are not that cold. And when we have a bunch of people in our home, it's certainly not going to be very cool inside. So within a couple of hours, you want to make sure that you put anything that needs to go into the refrigerator to get it cooled down. We tend to want to kind of graze afterwards and just pick at things after a meal, but it's really a good idea to put those things back into the refrigerator within 2 hours. And then you can always get them out later and reheat them. Or if they are, at a cold temperature, it's fine to eat those cold. But yeah, so that's a kind of a starting place of the things that I first think about is just starting clean, making sure that you're keeping things separate from one another so that you're avoiding cross-contamination possibilities, and then making sure after your meal that you're getting things back to a cool temperature rather than leaving them out at room temperature.
Yeah, because I remember growing up and coming home from school, throwing my backpack on the counter, maybe like dumping all the change in my pocket, like right next to the stove. And my mom used to get very upset with me with that. And she used to say, think about your backpack. I'm sure you've stepped on it the entire time you were at school.
Right? It's been on the floor.
On the floor of the school bus, which it's got to be one of the most hazardous places on earth.
Probably on the floor of the school bathroom, too. And purses, too.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Purses are just as guilty,
Yes.
They get set all sorts of places, and then you bring them home. But even if you don't store stuff on your counter, let's say you have pets, dander is constantly floating through the air. And cats are going to go where cats want to go, regardless of how you try to train them. Our cat is not allowed on the kitchen counter, but that doesn't mean she's not on the kitchen counter. So usually what we try to do whenever we start preparing a meal is we wipe all the counters down right before we get started. And there's a few steps when you're cleaning that you need to keep in order. And so you want to get off all of the chunky stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So clean off all the chunky stuff because you can't really get stuff clean if there's chunky stuff. So clean off all the chunky stuff. And then you want from there, then you can work on your sanitizing step because it has to be cleaned before it can be sanitized. And when I'm talking sanitized for a kitchen, it's a little different than if you're in a food production facility because, it's just your kitchen. You don't need to do a clean break and stuff. But Emily, can you give us a little bit of home kitchen ideas on how to best sanitize your countertops before you're cooking?
I will tell you, it's not something that people do very often.
It's not.
Yeah, the best thing to use in your home kitchen when you're going to do a sanitize step, and you're exactly right, we cannot sanitize a dirty surface. So it's got to be clean, like visually clean. It looks like it's clean. The sanitation step is just to remove any pathogenic bacteria to a safer level for us. So you're going to use 1 tablespoon of unscented liquid bleach to a gallon of water. That's your ratio, 1 tablespoon of bleach to a gallon of water. And we say unscented because anymore, there's a ton of bleach products that are out there in the laundry aisle that have all kinds of scents and special additives and things to them, which if we're talking about our laundry, that's one thing. But when we're talking about food surfaces, that's a completely different ballgame. So you want to just get regular, plain old bleach, and it only takes a tablespoon to a gallon. And then you're going to wipe that and let that completely air dry, because that's another important step when we're sanitizing a surface, is that you don't use a towel or anything to dry it, because then the chances of recontaminating that or contaminating it actually increase a lot.
Yeah. So one of the things that my mom always used bleach for everything. And if it didn't smell like bleach, it wasn't clean. So I don't know. I don't know if she was using the right concentrations or what, but like, I guess, for the typical consumer that maybe isn't paying too much attention to something or really likes convenience. Like if you were to buy those Clorox wipes as an example, people just like purchase those. Those are more than likely set to the right concentration, right?
And those would work too. The key part is that you've got it clean to start with. Like, don't use the Clorox wipe or other type of wipe to clean the surface and then assume that it's also going to sanitize at the same time. Like, make sure it's completely clean, then use that wipe, and again, let it completely air dry. And I'd say if you're going to be working with raw poultry, this would probably be the one step where I'd say it might be a good idea to mix up your own bleach solution, just to be sure that you're really getting everything sanitized after you've cleaned it. Just because when we're working with, especially this time of year, I mean, turkey's certainly popular at Thanksgiving, but also at Christmas time. And oftentimes we think that turkey is thawed out, and then it's the oh no moment when you get it out of the refrigerator and it's not thawed. Now, it is possible to still put that turkey in the oven and cook it, even if it's not all the way thawed. That's legit. You can do that. But if you want to have it thawed, especially so you can get that bag of giblets and all those things that are in there out, then typically that next best way of thawing, other than in the refrigerator, is in cold water in your sink, right? You should leave it in the package, and you want to make sure your sink is clean before you fill it up with water and submerge this bird in there. But make sure you leave it in the package, because that's going to keep some of that contained and keep those juices from getting all over your sink. But then by the time you're done and it really is thawed and you've got that turkey in the oven, your next step is to completely clean your sink and the counter and everything around it. And then you're going to want to take that next step and sanitize, because the chances of spreading salmonella they're a lot higher when we've got that bird sitting there in the sink for, what could be potentially hours, depending on how frozen your bird may be.
Yeah. And we started talking about bleach as being kind of a great way to sanitize countertops, to clean a lot of those harmful bacteria. But bleach will take care of the salmonella, the listeria, and most of the foodborne pathogens that we typically talk about.
Definitely when we're talking about cleaning. Now, another thing to think about is that just because we've cleaned our surfaces doesn't mean that what we're going to cook doesn't necessarily have some kind of contamination. So we need to then make sure that we cook it correctly. So making sure that we get anything that we're cooking to the correct minimum internal temperature. And that depends on what kind of food we're cooking, especially when we're talking about poultry. That's getting up to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which typically is going to be like, if you've got that little red button that comes in the turkey, that's typically where that's going to pop. But it's always a good idea to double check that with a food thermometer, just to make sure that it really has reached 165 at the deepest point of the breast. And also, like down inside the wing is another good point to check as well. And then if we're talking about something like a ham, because we a lot of families that probably are going to cook a ham for their holiday meal.
Oh, yes.
That's a little bit different because most of the hams, not all, but most of the hams that we have here in the US have been fully cooked. Then it's just our responsibility, I want to say to warm it up, but essentially that's what we're doing. I mean, it's already been cooked once. So we need to get it to 145 degrees. Now that can still take hours because this is a very dense piece of meat. And, depending on how many pounds it is, that could take a little while. So this is not like a minute in the microwave or anything like that. When we put it into the oven, that we're still thinking about that we're cooking it, but it's already been cooked once. So that's why we don't have to get it to quite as high of a temperature like what we would have to do with our poultry products.
Right. Those are very good points. Making sure you know where to stick that thermometer is essential if you don't have the magic button. And sometimes even if you do have the magic button, like Emily said, to give it a second look and make sure that you have gotten to that temperature at all of the internal parts, especially if there may have been a couple ice crystals left inside before you stuck it in the oven.
Yeah, and that's really good. In fact, there's a food safety class that I was watching a few weeks ago, and it was part of our Rotary, and they were talking about food safety for one of the fundraisers, and he did mention that every time he cooks meat, he makes sure that it's at the proper temperature because there's really no way to just know.
That's right.
You can't say, it looks like it's fine, but you have to actually check it. We always talk about soil testing, right? You don't get soil tests, but it's kind of the same thing. But because you're talking about those ice crystals that are deep in the turkey, you're not going to know what's going on inside just because it's on the outside. It looks just fine. I mean, it's a thick bird.
Well, I mean, remember Christmas Vacation when they cut the turkey looked beautiful on the table, and then Clark Griswold went to cut it, and it did not look beautiful once it was cut, right? Like things can look picture perfect on the outside, but the only way you know what the temperature of that is to test it.
But in that case, it was completely dry.
There was nothing in it, yeah.
So, which is another way to make sure you kill the pathogens, completely dehydrate everything.
Yes, exactly. You will be very safe in that, but maybe a little hungry.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you had said in the very beginning about when you're doing the shopping and when you're bagging up your groceries. One of my biggest pet peeves is when raw meats get put in with anything else, with food that is supposed to be ready to eat. So cheeses, produce, raw meat needs its own separate bag where it's not going to touch anything else. And it's because if you're not going to cook something to eat it, then you don't want those pathogens getting on that. And farmers go through a lot of steps to make sure your produce is pathogen free. So don't let your produce get contaminated on the way home from the grocery store. So in your cart when you're shopping, keep it in a separate location. I always put my raw meats under the cart because, the packaging of the meat, while it may be sealed, it's been in with other things. Maybe one of the seals broke, maybe something spilled on it. There's no way to know for sure. And so taking that extra time or using the meat bags to give it an extra layer of protection, those are all really important steps, especially to protect your produce. And so I know that we're trying to reduce plastic waste, but those plastic produce bags are there to protect your fresh fruits and vegetables from contamination once you set them down in the cart or set them on that conveyor belt, which has had stuff running on it all day, meats, children, anything. And so you do want to make sure you bag your produce up and protect it from being exposed to contamination at the grocery store and on the way home.
Yeah, I was at the grocery store just yesterday, and I have 2 young teens. I left them for just a moment because I forgot something. I needed to go down to one of the aisles. So I came back, and they were just giggling together, which is unusual because most of the time it's a lot of bickering between the two of them. So it was kind of like joyful to be able to see this. And I asked them what's so funny? They said they were watching people's broccoli habits. I was like, okay, you're going to have to tell me more about that. And they said, Mom, like to watch people come up. First of all, they just thought it was funny that is apparently the most popular vegetable that is purchased at our grocery store because everyone was going to the broccoli. But they said, people will come up and they will pick up 4 different ones, Mom, before they will put it into a bag. And they're not picking, they're not putting the ones that they've picked up always into the bag. They're putting it back. And so I think it was very eye-opening for them to think about just how many hands have potentially touched the produce in the grocery store before your hand has touched that produce. So you are exactly right. Like that, whether you're putting it on the conveyor belt or wherever it is, or the hands that have touched it before, it's whatever we can do to minimize what kind of contamination is going to go onto the produce is going to be better. It's still going to be important to rinse it off once we get home, and then to try to keep it at the correct temperature for as long as possible before we're going to eat it.
Right. Yeah. Keeping produce chilled. Basically, the whole objective is to reduce the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way to completely eliminate risk. That's just life, right?
Right.
But to reduce the risk, you're going to try to reduce the ability of those pathogens to breed, which is why we refrigerate things. They're just not so active at those colder temperatures. And so if you can reduce the time that the product is at a temperature where these pathogens can breed, then you can reduce the impact of their potential exposure. Because being exposed to, like 5 organisms is very different than being exposed to 5 million organisms. And one of them you're not going to notice too much of, and the other one will definitely make you sick. So that time is really, really important. And when the beginning of the show, Emily had mentioned 2 hours. You want to refrigerate your hot foods after they've been out for 2 hours. And, we all get distracted and we have fun. We're having good conversations, hopefully. And, but do make it a point to get back into the kitchen and get that stuff back into a cooler, a refrigerator. And, if worse comes to worse and you don't have room in your refrigerator, grab a bag of ice when you're at the grocery store and set up a cooler specifically for that.
And it may be that out in your garage, depending, it looks like it's going to be pretty cold during Christmas this year. It could very easily be below 40 degrees in your garage. And so as long as you don't have any pets out there, then that's another option as well, is that you could just move that food outside and store it if you've got a countertop or something out there. And that's going to be way better than leaving it inside your house at room temperature.
Yep.
So what's the ideal temperature, Emily?
So you want to be below 40 degrees. Your refrigerator, if you can keep your refrigerator somewhere around 36 or 37 degrees, that's great. Same thing with, if you have a deep freeze, you want to be close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the time we can't reach that low in our, the small freezer part of our joint refrigerator freezers that are in our kitchens. But as low as you can get that temperature, the better. Sometimes we think about 32 because 32 is where water freezes, but that's where water freezes. Any of our frozen foods are going to need a lower temperature than 32 to freeze. So if we can be certainly in teens as far as what our temperature of our freezer would be in our kitchen, that's going to be the safest. And, another part of this conversation, besides food safety, is food quality, which the quality part is not going to affect us from a health standpoint, but it's going to help us utilize our food better, right? To make sure that we're making it last as long as possible, that it's going to taste the best when we eat it. So I think sometimes the whole storage part for folks can be a bit confusing because we're not sure how long can we store it from a food safety standpoint compared to what the food quality might be. especially when it comes to labels. I think labels can be very confusing for folks when they have a date on them. What does that date actually mean when it's on a food package? Like, am I allowed to eat this after the date? Is that going to make me sick if I eat it after the date? And really, almost all of the time, that date that's on the package, it'll say, best by or used by or sell by. There's some kind of a little phrase before it, but those are all quality indicators. So it's when you get to kind of use your senses to decide, do I want to eat this or not eat this anymore? And then that's going to make a big difference whether you're talking about having some lunch meat in the refrigerator compared to a box of dry cereal that's in your pantry. And there's a lot of guidance that's out there from Extension about using the dates, like how long will things last in the fridge or how long will things last in the freezer, and what's the recommendation when it comes to things in your pantry, like dried products.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up because we do get questions about that quite frequently. Hey, I found this jar of beef that I canned 10 years ago. Is it still good?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're doing your internet search for information on these types of things, make sure that you're ending your search with the word cite, SITE, and colon, and then .edu. And that will help reduce the search results from people that are trying to sell you things. Cite.edu will get you to our extension resources where we've really worked hard to make sure that they are relevant and understandable. And regardless of where you are in the country, your local extension office is always a great resource to ask your direct questions to, and we are always happy to help. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.